Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so today we're gonna radically shift how you look at generosity. Seriously. We're unpacking why the obligation to give isn't just some, moral guilt trip, but a raw scientific mechanism for your own personal survival. When you really dig into the research, it becomes super clear. We gotta throw out the etiquette book entirely and start looking at giving through the lens of pure self-preservation. The more you are given, the greater your obligation to others. I mean, we've all heard this classic phrase, right? We usually treat it as this polite rule of society, or maybe kind of like a moral tax imposed on the highly successful. It's that phrase that echoes in the back of your mind when you're asked to, say, donate, or volunteer, or share your expertise. And let's be honest, it feels like a heavy weight. It's this massive expectation society just drops on your shoulders once you achieve a certain level of wealth, knowledge, or influence. But here's the thing. If you look at this through the eyes of a scientist, or even a biohacker, you quickly realize something pretty profound. This isn't just a moral rule. Not at all. Hoarding is actually biologically and thermodynamically toxic. Giving, on the other hand, is literally the ultimate life hack for your own resilience. It's a mechanism of survival. Because when systems just accumulate energy without dispersing it, they don't thrive. They rot. So, today's explainer breaks down this massive paradigm shift. We're going to cover the obligation guilt trip, biology and the cancer analogy, thermodynamics and the stagnant reservoir, game theory and network resilience, and finally, your survival flow state. Let's get right into it. Starting off with Section 1, the obligation guilt trip, or rebranding the moral tax. Society often frames the obligation to give in these deeply uninspiring ways. It's treated as a moral finger wag, basically a guilt trip, explicitly designed just to make successful people feel bad enough to write checks to the less fortunate. And obviously, when we frame obligation this way, it naturally triggers defensiveness. I mean, nobody likes feeling taxed or guilted into parting with resources they worked super hard to acquire. It just feels entirely transactional and totally detached from our own well-being. But here is the fundamental reframe, the real game changer. In fields like thermodynamics, biology, and network theory, this obligation isn't viewed as a tax at all. It acts as a vital release valve. It is literally the exact mechanism required to prevent a system from exploding under its own pressure or rotting from stagnation. And wow, this changes everything, right? You aren't giving just to be polite. You're giving to keep your own system functioning. Moving right along to Section 2, biology, the cancer analogy, and the fatal flaw of taking. Okay, think about the human body. Every single cell is given nutrients, oxygen, and protection by the host. In exchange, its obligation is to perform a specific function. Maybe that's secreting enzymes, or contracting muscles, or transmitting nerve signals. But what happens when a cell takes in maximum nutrients and oxygen, but outright refuses its obligation to do its job? When it decides to act purely in its own self-interest and just hoards those resources to grow endlessly? Well, we have a very specific word for that: cancer. Cancer is, essentially, a group of cells that completely forgot their social contract. And think about the results. By hoarding resources and growing infinitely without contributing back to the whole system, the cancer inevitably destroys its host. And when the host dies, guess what? The cancer dies right along with it. It literally engineers its own destruction through pure selfishness. This beautifully and, tragically, proves that fulfilling your obligation to the system isn't charity, it's pure self-preservation. After all, how can you survive if you destroy the very environment you rely on? Which brings us to Section 3, thermodynamics, the stagnant reservoir and the rule of flow. This rule of flow brilliantly illustrates the stark difference in how natural systems handle resources. Just imagine two bodies of water. First, picture a river. It receives water from the mountains, but it doesn't hold on to it, right? It immediately passes it down toward the ocean. And because of this constant flow, the river is fresh, it's oxygenated, it's teeming with life. Now contrast that with the Dead Sea. It sits at a low point, receiving water constantly, but it has zero outlets. It gives absolutely nothing back. The water just sits there, evaporates, and leaves behind salt concentrations so incredibly high that they become totally toxic. Nothing can survive in it. And it turns out human beings are subject to these exact same laws of physics. If you are given intellect, wealth, or influence, and you do not deliberately create flow channels to disperse them, you run the real risk of becoming the human equivalent of the Dead Sea. Your excess literally becomes toxic. If you hoard knowledge without teaching, or hoard wealth without investing in others, or hoard influence without uplifting people, your resources just stagnate. The obligation to give is actually the thermodynamic mechanism that keeps your own resources fresh, dynamic, and totally alive. All right, Section 4, Game Theory, Network Resilience, and the Math of Survival. Imagine you are the only person in your tribe with a massive stockpile of food. You might think you're secure, but game theory tells us you are actually incredibly fragile. You're not safe, you're a target. Because you've hoarded the life-saving resources, you now have to spend massive amounts of your time, your attention, and your physical energy, we're talking perhaps up to 50% of it, just building walls, guarding your perimeter, and constantly playing defense against the rest of the starving tribe. Hoarding privilege doesn't make you a king. It makes you incredibly fragile. Now, compare that strategy of hoarding versus the strategy of giving. If you take that food and distribute it, actually fulfilling that obligation, you convert a static physical asset into a highly durable social asset. You're essentially buying loyalty, alliances, and community resilience. Hoarding creates a centralized point of failure, which is you. When a crisis hits, you stand completely alone behind a wall. But giving creates this decentralized mesh network. So when you stumble, you are caught by an indestructible web of relationships that you deliberately wove. Giving is how you mathematically ensure your own network support system. And finally, Section 5, your survival flow state, actionable steps for modern survival. Bringing all these scientific concepts into our daily lives reveals a pretty fundamental truth. The universe operates on cycles. Carbon, nitrogen, water, money, love, they are all meant to circulate. Nothing is meant to be hoarded in a closed loop forever. If you've been given a lot in this life, you are simply a larger conduit in this universal system. You're basically a wider pipe, which means the pressure flowing through you is that much higher. So to survive and thrive in the modern world, you gotta adopt these actionable steps. Step 1, identify your excess resources. Ask yourself, what do you have in abundance of right now? Is it time? Capital, specific expertise, or maybe empathy? Step 2, open the valve and let it flow. You have to release the pressure before it turns you into the Dead Sea. Find mentees, invest in community projects, or just share your platform. And step 3, transform. By deliberately managing this flow, you become a powerful engine of change. You aren't losing resources. You are fueling a larger machine that will ultimately sustain you. This quote perfectly summarizes our journey today. We really need to fundamentally rebrand obligation from this tiresome societal burden into a dynamic flow state of resources that keeps the entire system alive. Don't give just because society says it's the nice thing to do. Give because the biological, thermodynamic, and mathematical reality dictates that it's literally the only way to ensure you don't stagnate, isolate, or destroy the very environment you rely upon. So, as you evaluate the wealth, the knowledge, the skills, and the influence you hold in your hands today, you have to look in the mirror and ask yourself a tough question. Are you hoarding it all, slowly turning into a toxic, stagnant reservoir? Or are you opening the valve, distributing your assets to build an unbreakable mesh network and becoming a powerful engine of change? The choice, and really your survival, is entirely up to you. Keep flowing, and we'll see you in the next explainer.